So for, well, centuries, really, cultural narratives, Hollywood movies, and honestly, even the scientific community, they all kind of operated on this remarkably simple assumption about human intimacy.
Right, a very, very simplified assumption.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the accepted truth was always that men are driven by this singular, overwhelming urge for physical pleasure, right? And that women are primarily, if not, exclusively motivated by this desire for romantic love.
Emotional connection.
Right, emotional connection. It's just this really neat binary way of looking at the world.
Which is completely false, as it turns out.
Exactly. Because when researchers finally decided to, just put aside their assumptions and actually survey thousands of women about their private lives.
Actually ask them.
Yeah, asking them specifically what motivated them to be intimate, that whole neat binary just completely collapsed. I mean, they didn't find one reason.
No.
They didn't find 10. They uncovered the staggering 237 distinct, specific reasons why women engage in sex.
It's a massive number.
It is. And romantic love, the thing we're always told is number one. It wasn't even at the very top of the list.
It really fundamentally shatters basically everything we thought we knew. I mean, when you look at a number like 237, you realize that we haven't just been slightly off in our understanding of female sexuality.
All right, it's not a small margin of error.
No, we've been operating in a completely different, totally oversimplified universe.
Oh.
Because the motivations they found, they span from the deeply profound to the incredibly pragmatic and, well, in some cases, the darkly Machiavellian.
Yeah, totally Machiavellian. So today, for you listening, we are throwing out that old cultural playbook. We're going to use this deep dive to unpack the fascinating, complex, and sometimes really shocking science of human sexual motivation.
It's a wild ride.
It really is. And our roadmap for this conversation, it comes from a stack of just groundbreaking research led by clinical psychologist Dr. Cindy Meston and evolutionary psychologist Dr. David Buss.
Two absolute heavyweights in the field.
Yeah. We're looking specifically at their landmark 2009 study on age differences in sexual motivation. Plus, we've got a transcript from this incredibly captivating lecture Dr. Meston gave detailing her actual laboratory work.
Which is fascinating all on its own.
Oh, absolutely. And we also have several in-depth analyses of their findings published in outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian.
Yeah, and their work, I mean, it really is the bedrock of modern evolutionary psychology as it applies to intimacy. Because before Meston and Buss, the field was, well, largely speculative.
Just people guessing, basically.
Right. They brought empirical, hard data to a subject that had previously just been shrouded in all these cultural myths.
But to even begin to understand how the human mind conjures up 237 different reasons to be intimate, we first have to understand the biological hardware that's, running in the background.
The physiology.
Exactly. Because as these sources make incredibly clear, you really can't decode the psychology of female desire without first confronting this massive historical blind spot in the medical field.
Oh, the blind spot is huge.
Right. Regarding the female body specifically, up until recently, science essentially treated female sexual physiology like it was a black box.
I mean, black box is almost an understatement, honestly. The neglect was just systemic.
How so?
Well, if you look back at the famous Masters and Johnson studies in the 1960s and 70s.
Right, the ones everyone knows.
Yeah, they laid some initial groundwork for understanding human sexual response. But after that initial wave of research, funding for studying female sexual pleasure, it just virtually disappeared.
Wow, just gone.
Pretty much,
Wow.
Unless a study was strictly tied to reproductive function. So, fertility, conception, obstetrics grant agencies simply weren't interested.
God, that implies that the scientific establishment only valued the female body for its, utilitarian output.
Exactly.
If it wasn't making a baby, it wasn't worth studying.
Okay.
Did they just assume women operated exactly like men, but with different plumbing? That was literally the prevailing assumption for decades. Medical science took the male physiological response, which is, highly visible and comparatively straightforward.
Right, it's obvious.
And they essentially just mapped it onto women by analogy. They assumed the internal mechanics of arousal and desire functioned in parallel ways.
But they don't.
Not at all. As Dr. Meston points out in her lecture, mapping male physiology onto women tells us a great deal about male desire, but it tells us next to nothing about how women actually function.
So what happened when they finally looked?
Well, when researchers finally secured the funding to build laboratories specifically designed to measure female physiological responses, the data revealed a massive disconnect.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics of that laboratory setup, because the transcript of Dr. Meston's lecture goes into vivid detail about how they actually capture this data. And it's not just a matter of, like, asking people how they feel, right?
No, no. It requires some serious biometric hardware. To establish empirical data, you have to measure both the mind and the body simultaneously.
Okay, so paint the picture for us. How does the lab actually work?
So in Meston's lab, a participant is seated alone in a comfortable private testing room, and they are shown visual stimuli, typically erotic films.
But not just any films, right? The sources note something really specific here.
Right. Interestingly, when testing women, the researchers use films produced specifically by women, for women.
Because traditional male-produced erotica doesn't usually elicit the necessary response for a female baseline.
Exactly. It just doesn't work for the data they need.
The lecture points out that female-produced films tend to feature better lighting, a focus on reciprocal pleasure, and crucially, an actual narrative plot.
Yeah, context matters immensely, which is a theme we will see repeatedly today. But anyway, while the participant is watching this film, the researchers are gathering biometric data.
Okay, what are they measuring?
For male participants, they use a device called a penile strain gauge.
Okay, what is that exactly?
It is placed around the penis in a non-erect state, and it measures changes in circumference and resistance. So it provides a highly accurate, indirect measure of blood flow to the genitals.
Got it. A physical metric of arousal. And for the female participants, what's the equivalent?
They utilize a vaginal photoplethysmograph.
A what? That is a mouth.
Vaginal photoplethysmograph. It's basically a small tampon-sized device made of clear acrylic.
Okay.
And it emits a light source into the vaginal walls and contains a sensor that measures the amount of light reflected back.
Wait, light? How does light measure arousal?
It's actually really clever. When a woman becomes physiologically aroused, there's an increase in localized blood flow, right?
Right.
The vaginal tissues become engorged. And because engorged tissue is darker and denser with blood, less light reflects back to the sensor.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating.
Yeah. So by tracking the light reflection, researchers can graph the exact moment and intensity of physical arousal.
Okay, so the researchers have the physical data graphed out on a screen, but they don't stop there. They also use like a lever or a dial for the participant to manually report how turned on they feel in their mind at any given moment. Right?
Yeah, precisely. They're tracking the body's response and the mind's response at the exact same time.
Side by side.
Yes. And this is where the grand illusion of the male analogy completely falls apart.
What happens?
When you put a man in this environment, his psychological reporting aligns almost perfectly with his physiological data. The penile strain gauge registers increased blood flow, and the man simultaneously turns the dial to indicate he feels psychologically aroused.
So the mind and the body are operating in total synchronicity.
Exactly.
But the female data tells a completely different story.
A radically different story. For women, the physiological arousal often completely divorces from the psychological arousal.
Wait, really? Completely divorced?
Completely. The photoplethysmograph might indicate significant physical arousal, increased blood flow, tissue engorgement, biological readiness.
Right.
But the woman might report feeling absolutely zero psychological desire.
Zero.
None. And conversely, she might report feeling highly aroused mentally, while her body shows no significant biophysical changes.
That is staggering. So the body and the mind are speaking two entirely different languages, or perhaps one is actively ignoring the other.
That's a good way to put it.
Dr. Meston's research identifies two primary culprits for this profound disconnect, right? Anatomy and socialization. Walk us through the anatomical side first. Like, why wouldn't a woman's brain register her own body's signals?
Well, it comes down to the obvious physical differences in how arousal manifests. A male's physical response involves external organs and a significant, highly visible tactile change.
You literally can't miss it.
Right. It is an incredibly strong biological signal sent straight to the brain.
Right.
A woman's primary physical response is internal.
Ah.
The increase in vaginal blood flow and lubrication is objectively a weaker, less intrusive physiological signal. It just doesn't command the brain's attention in the same absolute way.
That makes a lot of sense. And then you add the cultural layer on top of that internal anatomy, because the lecture notes how differently boys and girls are socialized to interact with their own bodies from a very young age.
Oh, socialization plays a massive role here. Think about it. Boys handle their anatomy multiple times a day just for basic functions like urination.
Sure.
There's a familiarity and an ease with the physical sensations of their genitals. Girls, historically and honestly to a large extent currently, are socialized to treat their genital region as something separate, hidden, or even shameful.
Yeah, that's so true.
Dr. Meston explicitly mentions how women are often raised to view their own anatomy as a sort of biohazard zone.
Biohazard zone.
Yeah, a place you wash, but you don't necessarily explore or tune into.
Wow. I mean, if you are culturally conditioned for decades to ignore a specific part of your body, it makes perfect sense that your brain would eventually start filtering out the subtle signals it sends.
Exactly. It's a learned disconnect.
I'm trying to visualize how this plays out in real time. It feels like, okay, male arousal operates like the check engine light on a car's dashboard. It flashes bright, blinding red right behind the steering wheel. You cannot ignore it. You have to pull over and address it immediately because the signal is overwhelming.
That perfectly captures the urgency and visibility of the male physiological signal, yes.
But female arousal, based on Meston's data, it acts more like a complex, nuanced dashboard of very subtle dials. Like if the engine might be revving, the biological blood flow is happening, but the dials are small. And more importantly, those subtle dials can be incredibly easily overridden if there's any other noise in the cabin.
Yes.
If the radio is playing too loud, you just won't notice the dial.
And Dr. Meston specifies exactly what that noise is. Because the physical signal is weaker and easily ignored, a woman's psychological arousal becomes vastly more susceptible to environmental and contextual cues.
What kind of cues?
Meston notes, there could be 100,000 different things occupying a woman's mind. She could be worrying about an upcoming work presentation, wondering if the dog needs to be walked.
Right, stressing over an unresolved argument.
Exactly. Or even just thinking about the laundry.
The laundry, yes. And if the check engine light isn't blaring, those 100,000 other thoughts will easily drown out the subtle dials.
Very easily.
But this creates a fascinating logical pivot for our entire deep dive today. Because if a woman's body doesn't reliably force the issue of intimacy through an overpowering biological urge, then engaging in sex requires a much more conscious, active decision.
That is the crucial insight right there.
The mind has to find a reason to put the car in drive, even if the body isn't demanding it.
Yes. The disconnect between mind and body is exactly why the motivational landscape for women is so complex. Without an automatic, overriding physical imperative, the psychological reasons for having sex expand exponentially to fill the void.
Wow.
This is the mechanism that generates those 237 reasons.
Which brings us directly to the YS-Axis questionnaire. This is the centerpiece of Meston and Buss's work, and the origin story of how they compiled this list is almost as interesting as the list itself. I mean, they didn't just sit in a faculty lounge and brainstorm theories, did they?
No, they took an entirely ground-up approach. They utilized what's called a nomination method.
How does that work?
They went to a diverse group of participants and asked them a completely open-ended question. Please list all the reasons you can possibly think of for why you, or anyone you know, has ever engaged in sexual intercourse.
Just a totally blank slate.
Exactly. They wanted the raw, unfiltered data straight from human experience.
And man, the participants delivered. The initial raw data produced 715 distinct reasons. I can't even fathom having the bandwidth to process 715 different motivations for a single human behavior.
It was a massive undertaking. The researchers had to meticulously code and condense that raw data.
I bet.
They removed redundancies, combined identical concepts, and eventually distilled those 715 raw answers down to the 237 distinct, specific motivations we're talking about today.
That's still a huge list.
It is. For the purposes of the 2009 age cohort study we will discuss later, they actually further refined this into a 140-item core questionnaire. But looking at the full spectrum of those 237 reasons, it is a masterclass in human complexity.
It really is. Some of the reasons cited in the sources are just wildly unexpected. You have deeply profound, almost transcendent motivations.
Like what?
Like, one woman reported having sex because, quote, I wanted to feel closer to God.
Wow.
Yeah, the sources detail her specific theology. She viewed Christ as residing within both her and her partner, and the physical union was a way of facilitating a divine connection. I mean, that is a heavy spiritual weight to place on an act of intimacy.
It really demonstrates how physical acts are often co-opted to serve higher-order psychological or spiritual needs. But contrast that with the purely pragmatic answers.
Oh my gosh, the pragmatism is hilarious. You go from seeking divine union to women reporting, I wanted to burn calories.
Right.
Or the incredibly unromantic, it seemed like good exercise.
It literally reduces the act to a cardiovascular workout.
Completely. Then there are the culturally influenced reasons. The sources bring up Joan Crawford's infamous, quote, I need sex for a clear complexion.
Yes.
Women literally citing skincare routines as a motivational driver. Or the totally arbitrary reasons, like, someone dared me.
It runs the whole gamut.
But the one that really caught my eye was the medicinal category. I wanted to get rid of a headache. At first glance, that sounds like a sitcom joke, like the inversion of the classic "not tonight, I have a headache" trope. But the sources point out this is rooted in actual biology, isn't it?
Yes, medicinal sex is a documented phenomenon. It's actually fascinating. During climax, the human body releases a massive flood of endorphins and oxytocin.
Right.
Endorphins are endogenous opioid neuropeptides. They are essentially the body's natural painkillers, structurally similar to morphine.
Wow, like morphine.
Yeah. They bind to the opioid receptors in the brain, significantly reducing the perception of pain. So, utilizing intimacy specifically to eradicate a migraine is a scientifically sound functional strategy.
That is amazing. So we have divine connection, cardiovascular health, skincare, and pain management, all existing on the exact same list.
All of them.
Now, from a data science perspective, handing someone a list of 237 scattered reasons doesn't give you a workable model of human behavior. You have to organize the chaos. So how did Meston and Buss categorize this massive data set?
They employed a statistical method called factor analysis.
What does that do?
The goal of a factor analysis is to find hidden variables or overarching categories that group seemingly disparate items together based on how participants respond to them.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If a participant frequently checks, "I wanted to get a promotion," and also frequently checks, "I wanted to get back at my ex," the factor analysis identifies a correlation. It shows they are both using intimacy as a tool to manipulate an external situation. Through this analysis, the researchers found that almost all 237 reasons naturally clustered into 4 primary overarching factors.
Okay, let's define those 4 pillars because they really form the architecture for the rest of our discussion today.
Right. So the first pillar is the physical factor. This encompasses reasons driven by bodily sensations and stress management.
So just the basics.
Exactly. It includes having sex for pure physical pleasure, being driven by attraction to someone's physical desirability, seeking stress reduction, and what they call experience seeking, which is the curiosity to try a new technique or just the desire to have a novel sensory experience.
That feels like the baseline biological drive. What is the second factor?
The second is goal attainment. This is the strategic utilitarian pillar.
The Machiavellian one.
Yes, very much so. It groups together reasons where sex is a means to a specific tangible end. This includes seeking resources like money or career advancement, seeking social status like sleeping with someone famous to elevate your own standing,
Right.
seeking revenge against a cheating partner, or purely functional reasons like I wanted to change the topic of conversation.
Using sex as a conversational detour is an incredible psychological maneuver. Like, we are dangerously close to an argument about finances, so let me just deploy intricacy to shut this down. That's wild. Okay, what is the third pillar?
The third is the emotional factor. This aligns most closely with our traditional romantic narratives. It covers love and commitment, wanting to feel deeply connected, or realizing you are in love.
Makes sense.
But it also includes using intimacy as a form of nonverbal communication, such as expressing gratitude like saying thank you or offering an apology.
Interesting. And the final pillar?
The fourth is insecurity. This factor groups motivations driven by anxiety and self-preservation.
That sounds intense.
It is. It includes having sex for a self-esteem boost to validate one's own attractiveness, giving in to duty or pressure to keep a partner from becoming angry.
Wow.
And mate guarding, which is using sex proactively to keep a partner from seeking intimacy elsewhere.
Okay, so we have physical, goal attainment, emotional, and insecurity. When Meston and Buss applied this 4-factor model to thousands of men and women, the data produced a finding that completely upends a massive cultural stereotype, didn't it?
It absolutely did.
Because we've been told forever that men are the physical creatures seeking pleasure, and women are the emotional creatures seeking love. Looking at the data across all these factors, does that narrative hold any water at all?
The data completely dismantles it. When researchers looked at the absolute most common reasons women gave for having sex across all age demographics, the #1 response wasn't love.
What was it?
It was physical pleasure. The statements, "it feels good," and "I wanted to experience the physical pleasure," were universally the top motivations for women.
That is a seismic shift in how we talk about gender and desire. The baseline, the absolute foundation of female sexual motivation is just pure physical gratification.
Exactly. Now, the data does show that the emotional factor is incredibly important to women. I mean, out of the top 25 most frequently cited reasons, 18 of them pertained either to physical pleasure or to expressing love and commitment.
Okay, so love is high up there.
It is, but the idea that pleasure is a uniquely male pursuit and love is a uniquely female pursuit is demonstrably false. The desire for physical gratification is entirely symmetrical between the sexes.
But wait, if we are busting stereotypes here, let's look at the goal attainment factor. The cultural trope of the gold digger, the woman who uses sex transactionally to acquire resources, money, or social status, is a staple of Western media. Did the data validate that trope?
This is perhaps the most surprising finding in the entire study. When analyzing the goal attainment factor, it was actually men who scored significantly higher than women.
Wait, really?
Yes, men were vastly more likely to report using sex as a tool to boost their social status, or engaging what the researchers termed slumming, which is sleeping with someone of lower perceived social status just to add to their tally.
Hold on. You're telling me that men are actually using sex for social climbing and reputational enhancement more than women? That goes against literally every script we have. Even the New York Times article covering this research noted that Dr. Buss himself was caught off guard by that finding. How do we explain that?
Well, it likely comes down to how society rewards male versus female sexual behavior.
Meaning what?
For young men, sexual conquest is often heavily tied to peer validation and social hierarchy. Sleeping with a highly desirable partner elevates a man's status among his friends.
Right, the locker room talk.
Exactly. For women, historically, promiscuity has been socially penalized rather than rewarded. However, the New York Times piece also wisely points out a potential flaw in self-reporting.
Oh, like people lying on the survey.
Essentially, yes, survey bias. Men might be culturally conditioned to overreport callous or strategic reasons to appear more masculine, while women might underreport strategic reasons to avoid appearing manipulative.
Survey bias is a real thing. We all want to look good on the questionnaire, even if it's anonymous. But even factoring in potential bias, the overwhelming conclusion is that women prioritize physical pleasure just as much as men.
Unequivocally.
Yet, as the sources reveal, understanding that women want pleasure doesn't explain who they choose to experience it with. When a woman says, I'm physically attracted to that person, what is actually happening beneath the surface of that conscious thought?
To answer that, we really have to transition from clinical psychology to evolutionary biology.
Right.
Because physical attraction is rarely arbitrary.
Right.
From an evolutionary standpoint, physical features are biological billboards advertising underlying genetic fitness. Tanya Gold's article in The Guardian really wrestles with this concept.
Yeah, that article was great.
When a woman looks at a famously attractive man, a George Clooney or an Antonio Banderas type, she isn't just reacting to cultural beauty standards. Her subconscious is conducting a ruthless hunt for two highly specific things.
What are they?
Genetic benefits and resource benefits.
Let's break those down because this explains so much of modern dating behavior. What exactly constitutes a genetic benefit?
Genetic benefits are physical indicators that a potential mate possesses a highly robust, resilient genome that will produce healthy, strong offspring with a high chance of survival.
Okay. And resource benefits?
Resource benefits, on the other hand, are traits that indicate a mate's ability and willingness to protect, provide for, and invest long-term energy into the partner and their children.
The resource benefit makes sense. You look for someone stable with a good career or strong social standing, but how does a woman's subconscious actually scan a crowded room for genetic benefits? Guys aren't walking around with their DNA sequenced on their foreheads. How does the body detect good genes?
Through biological signals that bypass our conscious awareness entirely. And while men rely heavily on visual cues for mate selection, the research indicates that for women, the most powerful radar for genetic benefits isn't the eyes,
Get it?
yet the nose. The sources state unequivocally that women rate scent as the single most important sense when choosing a lover.
This completely recontextualizes human attraction. We think we are making conscious choices based on a great smile or a clever opening line, but our olfactory glands are secretly running a background check.
That's exactly what's happening.
The sources mention a study about MHC that sounds like pure science fiction. Walk me through exactly how this study was conducted.
The MHC study is legendary in evolutionary psychology. MHC stands for the major histocompatibility complex.
Okay.
It is a dense cluster of genes that controls the human immune system. By recognizing foreign proteins, The MHC dictates how effectively your body fights off pathogens and diseases.
And from a purely evolutionary offspring survival perspective, you don't want to mate with someone who has the exact same immune system profile as you, right?
Exactly. If you mate with someone whose MHC is identical to yours, your children will have a narrow, limited defense system.
Which is bad.
Very bad.
Yeah.
But if you mate with someone whose MHC is highly diverse and complementary to your own, your children inherit a much broader, more robust defense against a wider variety of diseases. The evolutionary imperative is to find an MHC mismatch.
But how could we possibly detect the immune system profile of a stranger?
The hypothesis was that MHC profiles are expressed through body odor.
Unbelievable.
To test this, researchers gathered a group of male and female participants. They took blood samples from everyone to accurately map their exact genetic MHC profiles.
Okay, so they have the hard data.
Right. Then, they instructed the men to wear plain cotton t-shirts for 2 consecutive nights without using any deodorant, scented soaps, or eating strong-smelling foods.
Wow, they wanted pure, unadulterated body odor.
Yes. They basically created a library of sweaty, biologically raw t-shirts.
That is kind of gross, but scientifically brilliant.
They placed these worn t-shirts into boxes. They then brought the women into the lab, had them smell the shirts one by one, and asked them to rate the odors on a scale from deeply unattractive to highly attractive.
The women had never seen the men. They knew nothing about their personalities, their incomes, or their physical appearance. They just had the scent. What did the data show?
The results were statistically undeniable. The women consistently rated the scent of the t-shirts worn by men whose MHC profiles were genetically complementary to their own as the most attractive and pleasant.
You're kidding.
Nope. Conversely, they found the scent of men with similar immune systems to be foul or off-putting.
That is deeply profound. Their noses were literally performing complex genetic sequencing to find the optimal immune system match for hypothetical offspring.
It's an ancient biological radar.
It makes you wonder how much modern society, with our colognes, our daily showers, and our dating apps that rely purely on 2D photos, is completely short-circuiting this whole system.
It is a significant disruption. We are visually selecting mates on screens while ignoring the most critical sensory data our evolution has provided us.
Wow.
And scent isn't just used to detect immune systems. The researchers conducted another study involving scent and physical symmetry.
Right, bilateral symmetry. Generally, the left side of a human face mirrors the right side. But nobody is mathematically perfect.
Correct. Environmental stressors, minor illnesses during fetal development, or slight genetic mutations cause microscopic asymmetries in facial structure.
Okay.
Therefore, a highly symmetrical face is a very strong biological signal of excellent underlying genetics and a resistance to developmental stressors.
We know from visual studies that humans universally find symmetrical faces more beautiful, but the researchers tested this through scent as well.
Yes, using a similar methodology. They meticulously measured the facial and bodily symmetry of a group of men using calipers.
Literally measuring them.
Yes. Then they collected their sweat and had women smell it without ever seeing the men. The women consistently rated the body odor of the most physically symmetrical men as the most attractive. They could literally smell the geometric perfection of a man's genetics.
It makes me feel like humans have latent superpowers we don't even understand. But there is a massive catch to all of these highly desirable genetic benefits, isn't there? The sources highlight a fundamental evolutionary trade-off that creates an immense amount of conflict in mate selection.
The trade-off is really the crux of human romantic trauma.
What is it?
The physical traits that signal the highest genetic benefits. Tall stature, broad shoulders, highly masculinized facial features like a pronounced jawline, and heavy brow ridges and deep voices. They're all driven by the hormone testosterone.
The classic Hollywood leading man features.
Yes, during puberty, massive surges of testosterone sculpt these physical characteristics. But here is the biological catch. Testosterone is a known immunosuppressant.
Wait, what?
High levels of it actively compromise the immune system.
That seems entirely counterintuitive. If high testosterone compromises the immune system, why would evolution program women to find it attractive? Wouldn't you want to avoid a suppressed immune system?
This is what evolutionary biologists call the handicap principle.
How does that work?
It is the exact same logic behind a peacock's massive heavy tail. The tail makes the peacock slower and easier for predators to catch. It is a severe handicap.
Right.
Therefore, only a male with vastly superior, extraordinary underlying health and genetics can afford to carry that handicap and still survive.
Ah, so the testosterone is the handicap.
Exactly.
A man is subconsciously signaling, my underlying genetics are so incredibly robust that I can afford to flood my body with toxic immune-suppressing levels of testosterone to build this giant jawline, and I still won't get sick. It's basically a giant biological flood.
It is an honest biological signal of supreme genetic fitness, but the trade-off is behavioral.
What do you mean?
The exact same high testosterone levels that provide those dazzling genetic benefits also strongly correlate with specific behavioral traits. High testosterone men are statistically more aggressive, more prone to risk-taking, and crucially, they are significantly more likely to engage in extramarital affairs and have multiple sexual partners.
Which means they're statistically terrible at providing reliable resource benefits. Tanya Gold's Guardian article frames this evolutionary dilemma perfectly. She says evolution forces women to choose between the dazzling, high testosterone guy and the safe, reliable guy. She essentially says it's like forcing a woman to choose between a high-performance sports car and a sensible minivan.
It's a brilliant analogy that perfectly encapsulates the dual mating strategy.
Yeah, the sports car, the highly masculinized, symmetrical guy, offers incredible performance and top-tier genetics.
Yeah.
He is thrilling, but he is terrible in the snow. He requires constant maintenance. He might break down. And because he is so flashy, another woman is highly likely to steal him. He is a massive flight risk.
A huge risk.
The minivan, the reliable accountant with average symmetry, might not give you the adrenaline rush, but he has cup holders. He's incredibly safe. He provides a massive resource benefits. He's fiercely loyal, and he will stick around to help raise the offspring.
And evolutionary psychology shows that women actively modulate this choice based on their immediate circumstances.
Well, how so?
Research indicates that a woman's preference literally shifts depending on where she is in her menstrual cycle.
Wow.
During the ovulatory phase, when conception is actually possible, women's olfactory and visual preferences strongly peak for the sports car. The highly masculinized faces and scents. Their biology is aggressively prioritizing genetic benefits when it matters most.
And the rest of the month?
During non-fertile phases, preferences often shift back toward the features associated with reliability and resource provision.
It is genuinely humbling to realize how much of our romantic lives, who we swipe right on, who gives us butterflies, who we marry, is heavily influenced by invisible evolutionary math and ancient hormonal cycles.
We are not as in control as we like to think.
Clearly. But as the YSX study makes clear, acquiring a mate, whether you choose the sports car or the minivan, is only the first chapter. Once the relationship is established, the reasons for having sex completely transform, don't they?
Yes, and this is where we transition into section 4 of our analysis. We move from the subconscious biology of acquiring a mate to the highly conscious, strategic psychology of managing a mate.
Right.
We're looking back at the goal attainment and insecurity factors, which reveal the darker, more Machiavellian side of human intimacy.
Machiavellian is definitely the right word. When you read the transcripts of what women actually told the researchers about how they use sex within long-term relationships, it reads like a corporate negotiation manual. Let's talk about sexual economics.
Okay, sexual economics is the concept of intimacy operating as an unspoken currency within a partnership.
Currency.
Yes. Well, the media often focuses on the extreme ends of this, trading sex for a promotion, a job, or expensive luxury goods. The everyday application is much more mundane, but incredibly common. Dr. Buss noted his own surprise at how thoroughly economic principles dictate daily domestic life.
Dr. Meston's lecture includes a quote from a woman in the study that perfectly illustrates this. She had a significantly lower sex drive than her husband, which was causing friction. So they struck a literal bargain.
Yes, I remember this one.
She agreed to engage in intercourse once a week, but explicitly on the condition that her husband agreed to mow the lawn and take out the garbage every week. She traded her physical intimacy for his physical labor. She literally told the researchers she viewed it as trading one equally aversive task for another.
It is a striking example of a profound desire mismatch within a marriage. But from an evolutionary perspective, it is a highly successful adaptation.
How so?
She identified a resource she possessed, intimacy, that was in high demand by her partner, and she leveraged it to secure resources, time, and energy that she required. It kept the relationship functional.
And this utilitarian approach bleeds directly into another massive category identified in the study, Duty sex.
Yes, duty sex has deep, complex historical roots. The concept is often summarized by a famous quote from Lady Alice Hillingdon in the late 19th century.
Oh, the diary entry?
Writing in her diary about her marriage, she noted, "I am happy now that Charles calls on my bedchamber less frequently than of old. As it is, I now endure but 2 calls a week, and when I hear his steps outside my door, I lie down on my bed, close my eyes, open my legs, and think of England."
Lie back and think of England. It's the ultimate tragic expression of bodily dissociation for the sake of marital peace.
It really is.
You would think that in the 21st century, with the rise of female empowerment and sexual liberation, the concept of duty sex would have vanished. But the 2009 study found it is still incredibly prevalent. Why are modern women still doing this?
Well, the motivations have shifted from Victorian societal pressure to highly strategic conflict avoidance. Many women reported engaging in sex purely to stop a partner from complaining.
Just to shut them up.
Exactly. One participant bluntly stated that listening to her husband whine about how horny he was became so psychologically taxing that it was simply easier to give in and get it over with than to endure the argument.
There is another quote in the sources from a woman who said she just lies there making grocery lists in her head, occasionally grunts so her husband thinks she is engaged, and then tells him it was great when it's over. And her conclusion was, "It seems to be working, we're happily married."
It's bleak, but it's effective for her.
It's so bleak. If women are using their bodies as a bargaining chip for chores, or treating intimacy as a chore itself just to buy some quiet time, does that fundamentally corrupt the definition of love? Are we just highly evolved apes bartering with our biology?
It is easy to view these behaviors through a cynical lens, certainly. But evolutionary psychologists do not view them as corruptions of love. They view them as sophisticated relationship maintenance mechanisms.
Meaning they serve a protective purpose.
Right. In the ancestral environment, keeping a provider happy and invested in the family unit was a matter of life and death. If duty sex or chore bartering prevented a partner from abandoning the relationship, it was a highly successful survival strategy.
That makes sense.
And this intense need to protect the relationship investment leads directly to another major tactical behavior, mate guarding.
Mate guarding is fascinating because it acknowledges the ever-present threat of infidelity. Tanya Gold paints a hilarious picture of this in her article. She says when she thinks of mate guarding, she imagines a man locked in a cage and a woman standing outside holding a spear in one hand and a bottle of baby oil in the other.
It's aggressive imagery, but conceptually, it hits the mark. Mate guarding is the proactive use of sex to prevent a partner from straying.
What's the strategy there?
The strategy is straightforward. Satiation. If a woman provides her partner with frequent, highly satisfying sexual encounters, she drastically reduces his motivation and his physical energy to seek out other partners. As one woman in the study summarized, "My mother taught me to please my man, or someone else will."
Wow. But the research points out that mate guarding is necessary because the world is absolutely teeming with mate poachers.
Yes. Desirable mates men who possess both the genetic sports car features and the minivan resource benefits are incredibly rare. Because they are high-value targets, they're almost always already in relationships. Consequently, humans have evolved highly effective strategies for luring away someone else's partner.
The cultural narrative often paints men as the primary predators, but the data shows women are fiercely competitive mate poachers, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The tactics are ruthless. The sources detail how women will weaponize their appearance, using high heels to alter their pelvic posture to mimic the lordosa's position of sexual readiness.
Oh, wow. I never thought of that.
Or using lip gloss to artificially signal youth and fertility. But the darkest tactic isn't physical, it's psychological. They use slander.
Slander? Like high school gossip level.
Exactly. Slandering a rival is a deeply effective evolutionary tactic. If a woman wants to poach a high-value male who is seeking a long-term relationship, she will subtly spread gossip that his current partner is promiscuous or easy.
Why that specific insult?
By doing so, she attacks the current partner's value as a reliable, faithful mother for future offspring. She introduces doubt into the man's mind about paternity, which is an evolutionary deal breaker. It is a highly calculated move to eliminate the competition.
It is absolute psychological warfare. And sometimes this warfare plays out in front of millions of people. Dr. Meston's lecture uses a brilliant pop culture example. Jessica Simpson in 2008.
Yes.
She started dating Tony Romo, the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Tony Romo's immediate ex-girlfriend was Carrie Underwood, who is famously a strict vegetarian. So Jessica Simpson goes out in public knowing the paparazzi are everywhere, wearing a tightly fitted t-shirt with giant letters that reads, "Real girls eat meat."
It is a masterclass in public mate guarding and territorial marking.
It's savage.
She is utilizing a physical garment to simultaneously broadcast her sexual availability, insult the dietary choices of her rival, and publicly declare to the world that she has successfully secured the high-value mate.
The quarterback is mine, and I have the protein to prove it. It's just incredible. And if mate guarding fails, and the partner does stray, the YSXX questionnaire reveals that women have a very specific response for that scenario as well: revenge sex.
Yes, revenge falls squarely under the goal attainment factor. The motivations here are explicitly punitive.
They want to cause pain.
Exactly. Women reported having sex specifically to get even with a cheating partner, to actively destroy a rival's relationship, or simply to inflict maximum emotional pain on an ex.
One participant's quote was chillingly straightforward. She said, "My ex was an asshole to me, so when we got out of the relationship, I had sex with his friend. It was fun, and I enjoyed it because I knew it would piss him off."
We've all heard stories like that.
We have, but seeing it categorized as a primary driver of human sexuality is wild. How does psychology explain this need for reciprocal pain?
From a psychological standpoint, revenge sex is fundamentally about rebalancing shattered power dynamics. When a woman is cheated on or cruelly discarded, she experiences a massive loss of perceived mate value and agency.
She feels powerless.
Exactly. By actively choosing to sleep with someone her ex knows, especially a friend or a rival, she forcefully reclaims her agency. She demonstrates that she is still highly desirable, she is in control of her own body, and she has the power to inflict emotional damage in return. It restores her psychological equilibrium.
So if we look at the whole board, women are navigating an incredibly complex web of motivations. They are seeking physical pleasure, experiencing divine connection, bartering for household labor, enduring duty sex for peace, guarding their partners with baby oil and spears, slandering rivals, and sleeping with friends for revenge.
It is a very wide web.
Knowing when to deploy which of these 237 strategies requires an immense amount of social intelligence and life experience. You wouldn't expect a teenager to have the same tactical playbook as a 40-year-old.
Which brings us perfectly to the culmination of all this research. The specific 2009 study conducted by Meston, Hamilton, and Hart.
Let's get into it.
They recognized that sexual motivation cannot be static. They wanted to understand exactly how this massive motivational toolkit evolves as women age and gain life experience.
Let's look at the architecture of this 2009 study. How did they break down the demographics to track this evolution?
They surveyed hundreds of premenopausal adult women and deliberately stratified them into 3 distinct developmental cohorts based on age and typical life milestones.
Okay, what was the first group?
The first cohort was women ages 18 to 22. This represents the youngest group, primarily college-aged. Demographically, these women are largely unmarried, do not have children, and are just beginning to navigate independent adult relationships.
The entry-level cohort, they are just stepping onto the playing field. What about the second group?
The second cohort was women ages 23 to 30. This is a critical transitional period. Women in this group are generally entering the professional workforce, establishing their careers, forming serious long-term commitments, or entering first marriages.
And maybe starting families.
Yes, a small percentage are beginning to have their first children.
So the stakes are getting higher. And the final group?
The third cohort comprised women ages 31 to 45. This represents the established adult phase. The majority of women in this group are married or in long-term partnerships. They've reached a level of financial and career stability, and a significant portion are actively raising children. They are managing peak logistical and emotional loads.
Okay, so they have these 3 distinct life phases, and they have all the women take the 140-item version of the YSX questionnaire. When I first read the results, I expected a total inversion.
You thought the answers would flip.
Yeah. I expected the 18-year-olds to be purely focused on pleasure and the 40-year-olds to be entirely focused on duty sex and emotional connection. But that's not what the data showed at all. If you look purely at the top reasons for having sex, did they change across the decades?
Counterintuitively, no. When the researchers isolated the top 25 most frequently endorsed reasons for having sex, the lists for the 18-year-olds and the 45-year-olds were virtually indistinguishable.
Wait, really? The same?
Almost identical. Across every single age cohort, the absolute most common reasons remained. It feels good. I wanted to experience the physical pleasure. I wanted to express my love, and I wanted to show my affection.
That is actually deeply reassuring. The core biological and emotional pillars, pleasure and love, do not erode over time. A 45-year-old woman is just as driven by physical gratification as a 19-year-old. The baseline remains rock solid.
Yes, the foundation doesn't change.
But if the top reasons don't change, what did the study actually discover? Where is the evolution?
The evolution is found in the secondary reasons. The questionnaire didn't just ask women to check a box if they'd ever had sex for a certain reason. It asked them to estimate the proportion of their total sexual experiences that were driven by each specific motivation.
Ah, okay.
And the data revealed a massive divergence in the secondary subfactors.
Break down the numbers for us. What did the older cohort endorse that the younger cohort didn't?
The women in the 31 to 45 age group scored significantly higher on 9 out of the 13 subfactors measured.
9 out of 13.
Yes. Compared to the younger women, the older cohort was vastly more likely to use sex for stress reduction, to validate their own physical desirability, for experience seeking, for resource acquisition, for boosting social status, for revenge, for emotional expression, for a self-esteem boost, and for mate guarding.
So, to synthesize this, the older women aren't abandoning pleasure or love, they are just adding a dozen other utilitarian and psychological reasons into the mix. I was trying to conceptualize this, and I came up with an analogy. Tell me if this holds up to the psychological data. It feels like watching a musician learn to play a complex instrument, like a guitar, over the course of a lifetime.
I like where this is heading. Let's explore the guitar analogy.
Okay, so at 18 years old, you are a beginner. You only know how to play 3 or 4 basic chords. So when you pick up the guitar, when you engage in intimacy, you play the hits. You have sex because it feels good, or because you are deeply attracted to the person, or because you think you are in love.
Right, the fundamentals.
Your repertoire is limited to the fundamentals. But by the time you are 40 years old, you've been playing the instrument for 2 decades. You haven't forgotten the basic chords, but you have mastered the entire fretboard. You now know exactly how to use sex to relieve the physical tension of a migraine.
Yes.
You know how to deploy it strategically to negotiate a household dynamic with a stubborn partner. You know how to use it to boost your own self-esteem after a brutal week at work. And you definitely know how to aggressively strum a heavy chord to mark your territory if a mate poacher wanders into your life. Your toolkit is just vastly larger.
That is an exceptionally accurate analogy. The older woman hasn't lost the melody. She has learned how to arrange a symphony around it. And the researchers posed the critical question, why does this repertoire expand so dramatically?
What is it?
The hypothesis is not that 40-year-old women are necessarily having a higher frequency of sex than 20-year-olds. It is that they are experiencing intimacy within a vastly more complex ecosystem of contexts and pressures.
Right, because a 20-year-old college student's life, while stressful to her, is structurally relatively simple.
Exactly. The younger cohort is primarily focused on mate selection and establishing independence. The 40-year-old woman is operating in a high-stakes environment. She's likely managing a demanding career trajectory, navigating the financial stress of a mortgage, attempting to maintain a long-term marriage that is vulnerable to routine and boredom.
Plus raising children, dealing with aging parents, managing shifting social hierarchies, the structural load is immense.
Yes, the load is massive. Therefore, her sexual behavior adapts. It evolves to serve multiple simultaneous functions within those complex contexts.
It is the ultimate form of psychological multitasking. A 20-year-old might have sex on a Friday night simply to achieve an orgasm, but a 40-year-old woman might have sex on a Friday night, and in that single act, she is simultaneously achieving an orgasm, expressing deep love to her partner of 10 years, celebrating a work promotion, relieving the physical cortisol buildup of a 60-hour work week.
And ensuring her husband feels desired so he doesn't stray.
Exactly, and maybe subliminally getting back at a neighbor who flirted with him. The physical act is exactly the same, but the psychological scaffolding supporting it has become a skyscraper.
It is a brilliant encapsulation of the research. The sexual act remains constant, but the cognitive and evolutionary architecture beneath it grows incredibly intricate. The 2009 study conclusively proves that while all women are fundamentally anchored by physical pleasure and emotional connection, the true hallmark of mature female sexuality is its profound strategic adaptability.
When you zoom out and look at the massive journey we have taken today, it is truly staggering how much the science has evolved. We started by dismantling the black box of female physiology, revealing that biological disconnect, that dashboard of subtle dials that requires the perfect environment to even register.
We expose the invisible ancient evolutionary math dictating physical attraction, where our olfactory glands are secretly sequencing MEC profiles and sniffing out the geometric perfection of symmetrical faces.
We waded into the deeply Machiavellian waters of modern relationships, unpacking the realities of sexual economics, the survival tactics of chore bartering and duty sex, and the fierce t-shirt-wearing psychological combat of mate guarding and poaching.
And we culminated with the 2009 cohort data, mapping out how these diverse motivations don't disappear with age, but rather compound and expand, giving women a masterfully complex, multifaceted sexual toolkit to navigate the heavy demands of adulthood.
It is a total paradigm shift. Next time you feel a sudden, inexplicable romantic urge, or the next time you find yourself analyzing a confusing transactional dynamic in your own relationship, I want you to remember those 237 reasons. Remember the YSEX questionnaire, because you are almost never just feeling one simple thing.
You are the living, breathing culmination of millions of years of evolutionary survival tactics, complex localized blood flow responses, intricate neurochemical releases of endorphins and oxytocin, and highly nuanced, high-stakes social negotiations. Your motivations are valid, they are ancient, and they are incredibly strategic.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over as we end this deep dive. We've spent the last hour exploring how human intimacy, arguably our most private, vulnerable, and romantic act, is actually driven by a massive sublayer of strategic, evolutionary, and economic motives. We use it for stress relief, for acquiring resources, for social climbing, and for genetic optimization. It is fundamentally calculated.
Right, highly calculated.
But if our most intimate acts of love are secretly this strategic, what does that say about the rest of our seemingly pure daily interactions? If love and sex are governed by biological bartering and evolutionary self-interest is true, selfless altruism just another illusion programmed by our genes. Something to think about the next time you drop a coin in a tip jar, hold the door open for a stranger, or decide to buy someone a drink. Are they being kind? Or is your major histocompatibility complex just making a long-term investment?
An unsettling but thoroughly fascinating question to leave us with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior. Keep an eye on your dashboard dials, and we will see you next time.